All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Successful Coach podcast, which is currently being rebranded to the Remarkable Coach podcast. Here with me, I've got Alvaro Peralta. Alvaro is the Wired coach at Wired Execs. He's one of less than 900 CIQ certified coaches in the world. That's conversational intelligence. Alvaro works intimately with business leaders on their communications with themselves and others to quickly and efficiently achieve success and fulfillment. Alvaro, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we hit record, we were having an interesting conversation on some stuff, and I wanted to put a pause on that so we could continue that here. But before we circle back to that, would you tell me a little bit about kind of your origin story? What got you into coaching? How did you come into this?
I was introduced to coaching in the early 2000s. At the time, I owned a restaurant. I was about probably 12 years into restaurant ownership. I didn't know executive coaching existed, business coaching existed. And I met my brother's fiance at the time, Pamela Pritchard, who was an executive coach, a very successful executive coach. And she introduced me to this wonderful world of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it just grabbed me right away. I said, this is what I was born to do. And I was just like beelined right to it. In 2004, I started studying quite heavily and traveled back to Ottawa to do a course with integral coaching.
Hmm.
And that's where the whole thing started. And I haven't looked back.
Right on. You're based in Vancouver, BC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right on. Right on. So what we were talking about before we started recording is this idea that in order to enable or kind of set the stage for neuroplasticity and learning, you need to get to a place of discomfort and almost frustration. Can you just circle back to what we were talking about before and kind of tell us about that? You're taking a class at MIT on this kind of stuff. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that the advances that they're making in neurosciences and neuroplasticity is a big hot word right now and stuff like that is absolutely amazing. There's internationally there are so many excellent labs studying everything from meditation to speech to ocular, all sorts of different things in neurosciences. I think there's a bit of a misnomer out in the marketplace that neuroplasticity is something we achieve.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like it's a goal to get to. And neuroplasticity is a state, and it's it defines a chemical soup in our brains that allow for the brain to rewire itself or wire itself in certain ways. It allows for that change to happen, and that in a newborn is very active. It's overactive compared to somebody a little bit older, and continues to be actually quite active and quite plastic. That state we tend to stay in that state until they're about the age of 25. After that, we need to work on it a little bit, and the more conscious we are about it, the more results we get.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about frustration is, in order to create this state, this condition of neuroplasticity, one of the great ways to get there is to actually be frustrated. Now, it's a very focused frustration, right? So we want to try and do something that we are not proficient in, that we care and have an urgency to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, maybe I want to learn a new scale on guitar, or I don't play piano at all. Maybe I want to just get the scales down, or I want to learn some blues lick on the piano. The ideal thing for somebody my age, slightly over 25, is to find something I can do for about 7 to 20 minutes, somewhere in there, 7 to 20, 25 minutes, very focused, something I'm not proficient at that I really care to learn. And in that frustration of, plunking the wrong keys and getting bad sounds and not getting it right, I want to include the frame of mind of being excited about making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
of being conscious that mistakes are the way that the brain figures out what the right wiring is. And the reason that having that mindset is so important is that it releases dopamine. And dopamine is a huge instigator of neuroplastic success. So it's really fascinating, and it totally changes what we do as coaches. Um, I think neuroscience for coaches is not huge at this point. It's my niche. This is what I do.
Mhm.
I think that eventually this will be the way that people coach, whether
Mhm.
it's business coaching or on the field, at a soccer game. This is kind of the things that coaches are going to learn that they need to be able to do is create this state of neuroplasticity.
Mhm. So you mentioned that one of the important things going into that is having this growth mindset that has excitement attached to it. How can you how can you set yourself up for success when you're going into something like that, especially as an adult? Um, we the old saying, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, right? We're sitting down at a piano to learn how to play piano. Certainly there's going to be frustration in that. How can you set yourself up for success to be excited about something like that?
So I'll speak to two things there. Teaching an old dog new trick. Let me start with that one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Um, Dr. Swart, Tara Swart, shared with us a phenomenal case study. That's actually a documentary. Unfortunately, I don't have the name of the documentary right now. I'm sure it's easy to find. Of a group of 70 to 85-year-old people that they took and they divided the group in two. And one group was given for a week the exercise of looking at pictures of when they were 55, 60 years old, maybe 20 years before, and reminisce and videos and talk about and kind of just revisit that whole stage of their lives. The other group were actually transposed to houses very similar to the ones they lived at that age. And now
Mhm.
here's something interesting that they did. They went back, and if you weren't wearing reading glasses at 55, they took your reading glasses away. If you weren't using a walker, they took your walker away. You had to lug your suitcase up the stairs into the house, put your stuff away, and live as if you were 55, 60 years old again.
Mhm.
And they try to recreate this stage of life. Some phenomenal things happen in both groups. Both groups actually regressed in a way in age.
Mhm.
The group that was transposed into the houses that were like the ones that they lived in when they were 60, 55, 60, their eyesight improved. Their musculoskeletal system improved.
Mhm.
Their motor skills and their cognitive functions improved. So much so that at the end of this whole experiment, another group was brought in to view pictures of before and after of each of these individuals.
Mhm.
Not one person got it right. They all thought that the younger person was the before picture and the older person was the after picture.
That's incredible.
So what? Why does that matter for business? And I think that when we're younger, as you see, in Palo Alto, we take risk and we do things blindly, a little blinder than once we've been around the block a couple of times,
Yeah.
and we're less restricted. There's something about that state of being that allows for a certain creativity and a certain reach that we tend to lose as older business owners.
Mhm.
So this is, I think, a really important learning to be able to say, if you want to encourage your brain to optimally function, then reaching out for these ways of creating this neuroplastic stage, there's some really cool scientifically backed ways of doing that now.
Yeah. That's very cool. I mean, I think that study or that documentary that has a profound affect on just life in general, not just business. I mean, anything in just your life is going to go to, it's going to naturally make its way into business. It's going to naturally make its way into your personal life, into relationships, everything.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I think it's a dirty little secret in executive coaching is
uh-huh.
that we're all life coaches.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I don't have a single, I can't tell you of a single client that I've worked with in the last, since 2004, that hasn't turned around and said, I'm going to try this at home.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Or has come back to say, my spouse doesn't recognize me,
Uh-huh.
wants to know what you did with the other guy or the other girl.
Yeah. The one who is super stressed out and very controlling or whatever else,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
other symptoms there were.
Yeah. And when coaching is successful and we're able to do this dance properly with our clients, um, this is the kind of marker you're looking for to know that you're being successful. If you're not hearing that as a coach, then you should really wonder, what am I doing? Am I having the impact this person really was looking to have?
Yeah.
And so I look for that. I consciously look for people to come back and say, I tried feeding the dolphin with my wife. Holy guacamole! Did my kids? Oh my god, it totally worked. And yet I'm talking to the CEO of a company, and the ramifications of how we show up in the world, they don't stop at the door when we leave our work.
Hmm. Yeah. Cool. Cool. So I think maybe we took the long way around. But tell us now about your current practice, like what you're an executive coach, you're working with business types. Tell us a little bit about your current practice and what, a little bit about what you do and how you do it.
So Wired Execs is a neuroscience-based approach to coaching, and um, one of the things that I've learned in my career is that coaching individuals um, has an impact and can lead to great results. And sometimes there's a necessity just for individual coaching. Working with an organization in a greater capacity, so with some teams, maybe upper level management or the sales team or production teams, adds a whole new level of impact. It gets everybody on the same page, allows the coach to consistently get not a 360, because you're not talking to the clients and the suppliers and everybody else involved in everybody's life.
Mhm.
You're getting at least a 180, the internal component of the business. You're hearing it from different perspectives and different areas in the business. And I think as a coach, this can be really, really valuable, because you can be so much more supportive and so much more challenging, particularly with the CEOs and the executive suite.
Mhm.
Um, so what I do is I do experiential sales training and I do executive coaching. Maybe
Mhm.
somebody else would do human resources and executive coaching.
Sure.
But being able to actually straddle two areas and have expertise in two areas really allows for much deeper engagement to happen. Not to mention that as a coach, there's a lot more contracts available because
Mhm.
it's much more exciting.
Mhm. Why specifically those two areas for you?
Experiential sales training, for me, is an essential component of business. You can do a lot of way. You can trim the fat in a lot of areas in a business. If you take
Yeah.
sales out, you're done.
Yeah.
So for me, it's essential. And
Mhm.
why is it essential? From a coach's perspective, you have an access to frontline staff that are actually communicating not just with clients, but with prospects. And prospects are the ones that are really going to tell you what their pain points are. They're really going to be the ones that pick your product and service apart. They're going to give you so much valuable information that if your sales team is properly trained,
Mhm.
they can relay that information to the different departments and the executive suite so better decisions can be made.
Mhm.
I, there isn't a business that's static. The
Sure.
business that's static
Sure.
is dead,
Yeah.
right? So even a five and dime in a neighborhood, it doesn't seem to change over the years. And yet when you look and you look closer, they're always tweaking and making little changes.
Mhm.
Now, an aggressive business owner is going to have 10 five and dimes in a number of years.
Mhm.
And somebody who just has it as a lifestyle, then they bought a job. And for me, that doesn't define a business. If they're not there, they don't make money. That's not a business to me. So
Yeah.
sales for me is essential. I think that one of the things that, one of the challenges I had early in my career was actually coming in to speak to CEOs and executives, because a lot of what I was talking about was succession planning. And that was not a subject that was, oh yeah, come on in and talk to me about, how to put me in a coffin and take me out of here.
Yep.
Not that wasn't the ideal situation.
People don't
It's
get excited about that.
yeah, it wasn't like, oh yeah, it's you, come on in. It was like, oh God, yeah, it's the Grim Reaper. Get out of here. So so I had to find a way to build rapport and the level of trust to become a trusted advisor, and to find enough juice to take to them to say, let's talk about this. And eventually it opened the capacity to have a conversation around succession planning,
Mhm.
which funny enough is not exactly, it's not about taking people out of the business. It's actually about bringing people through the business. And so funneling them and having always the capacity to take people from one level to another level, knowing that there's somebody else also being mentored to take that position, right? So
Sure.
succession planning is not just to get the CEO out. Succession planning is to take the mailroom person and make them an executive,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
sales is something that a lot of businesses want. They want to improve sales. We're always looking for ways to improve sales, and it's something I have expertise in. It's something I totally am passionate about. I love it,
Mhm.
and I do experiential sales. So, what a better way to get to know a business? I go in and I talk to a business about the process that they're using today, the funnel that exists today, their description of an ideal client today, and we
Mhm.
go through all of that. And with that, we create a foundation for a course that actually is going to be specific to that business and that group of people.
Mhm. Talk a little bit about experiential sales. What does that mean? How is that different from regular sales consulting, for example?
I think there's you go to these conferences, or there's a retreat and they bring in a speaker, and the speaker gets up there and does a great presentation. I've seen Pink do soar, and there's all sorts of great speakers out there, uh and it's something I do as well.
Mhm.
um and yet it's general subject, right? And if there's no application attached, then it just becomes what I call edutainment.
Okay.
Everybody's pumped, that was fun, let's go
Sure.
get another donut and coffee and fall back asleep, right?
Sure. You got to
And
have that call to action at the end. Something a destination for people. Is that what you're saying, or am I
well,
reading into
well,
it wrong?
partially, usually it's the book at the back of the room, right?
Sure.
Oh, and don't
Yeah.
forget to buy my book, and you'll
Yeah.
get some more in-depth, blah, blah, and that's all right.
Yeah.
Experiential learning is an adult style learning. I mean, children do it as well. In Montessori and areas like that, they use experiential learning. Experiential learning is actually a methodology of teaching that allows you to work with real life matters in the moment, so that people actually embody it. I don't really have a test at the end of the
Mhm.
day. You either embodied it or you didn't, and you know that. So
Mhm.
for me, I go in, and when I do experiential sales training, I'll do group work. We'll sit
Mhm.
down, we'll lay a foundation, we'll do a lot of discovery, and then we'll see what solutions float to the top. We'll work on those. I'll give some foundation around the neuroscience of sales.
Mhm.
And then I'll work one on one with each individual salesperson. And why is that? Every single person has a different reason why that phone could weigh 10,000 pounds.
Mhm.
We all have fears, desires, greed that is different. It has different drivers. And so the one on one allows me to tune into that particular person's, right? And then we bring it back together as a group, and we learn to communicate using that foundation of CIQ that you mentioned, conversational intelligence that you mentioned, which is a conscious way of creating a conversation that is playful, that releases the capacity to trust and to want to participate, say difficult things, as opposed to what happens in a lot of sales organizations, which is amygdala hijack. You're
Mhm.
not hitting your numbers. Bring me the prospects you're working on, and automatically the salesperson is like, oh, here we go, right? um,
Sure.
and many times they fudge the numbers, right? Because every Friday they got to put the report in, and the micromanager is, just looking at the reports, and if you say you hit 25 calls a day, they don't dig deeper,
Sure.
right? And for me, these are broken systems, and
Sure.
they don't give rise to the biggest gift we have as human beings, which is dialogue. And so
Yeah.
that's what experiential sales training is all about: keeping it real. I don't work on Acme company case study. I may share a case study to set the foundation for a conversation, and then we say, how does that relate to us here today, right?
Interesting. Yeah, you mentioned you know the idea that there's no test at the end of the day, right? You embody it or you don't. It kind of sounds like what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, just in terms of learning. Like you either learned it or you didn't. And getting people, like you also mentioned, getting people excited as you're working with them. So setting the stage for that, neuroplasticity to ping
Yeah,
on that.
absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely. And I think that when the coaching world starts looking at neuroscience in a much broader um, way, as an organization, as a group, as coaches,
Mhm.
you're going to see coaching hit whole new levels.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong. I personally don't do assessments with my clients, maybe a 360 sometimes, but I don't do personality assessments or anything like that. Um, and a lot of times I don't use the common tools of journaling and whatnot, quadrants and all these things to work with my clients. I don't rely on those tools too much. I
Mhm.
rely more on deeply listening to the conversation and trying to assess, where is this person at
Mhm.
in a neurological way,
Mhm.
so that I can, and where do they want to get to, so that I can help them chart a path for themselves on how to get there. Right. So in
You're
coaching, what we're
focusing
trying to
on
do,
you're focusing on empathy. It sounds like, right?
absolutely, you have
You're
to
making
be extremely empathetic. And
you're
and
making
and
a connection.
yeah, the beautiful thing about science is that if you just gather the facts, the words that are being said are facts. Those are, I'll give you a great example, and I think I've shared this with you in the past. The power of language to shift neurologically how we're experiencing something is very profound.
Mhm.
During the pandemic, what we've been asked to do is to socially distance, correct?
Sure.
What if I asked you to physically distance instead? Which one would you rather do? Socially distance or physically distance?
Physically, I
Yeah.
suppose.
And if I asked you logically, let's say you're 10 years old, grade 5. I want you to socially distance 2 meters, or I want you to physically distance 2 meters. Which one is easier for you to comprehend and actually take action on?
Physically, for sure,
Yeah.
without a
This is the
question.
power of this is the power of language. What's actually happening is when we ask people to socially distance, we're actually asking them to do one of the biggest fears known to man, which
Sure,
is isolation.
sure, because we were raised for millions of years with tribes.
We're like ants, we're like
Yeah,
bees, we're colony, right?
yeah,
It's not by accident that we end up living in these huge urban centers.
yeah.
This is the natural state of being of the human condition.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden to say, don't socially, don't socially get together, don't get close to each other socially.
Yeah,
Um, we can deal with distance. When we socially, I mean, look at what happened with Zoom. It's a
yeah,
perfect example of the urgency that we have as a species
sure.
to connect.
Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. That's good stuff. So you started out working with executives in planning for their, I'll call it a transition, transition planning. Tell us about the arc of your career, because I don't. You're working with, you started out there, and what kind of clients are you working with today?
So initially, I started, as most coaches do. I started with the requirements of any course of finding friends and family that are willing to subject themselves to your rudimentary coaching.
Yep.
And yeah, and I got all, I'm sure every coach that's listening to this gets they go home and then some family member turns around and says, don't you coach me.
Uh-huh.
I got that. I was coaching everybody, even a squirrel outside the house. I, go out there and say, hey, so what's really important to you? um, and then I I came at it from a different side. I think most coaches come from the HR world, and
Yep.
a lot of coaches are sponsored to do their studies, and it's part of their, they work in government or big business. Maybe they work at Google or something like that, or even even medium or small enterprises. It's not an uncommon thing for HR people to take.
Mhm.
Um, I owned a restaurant. I had a
Mhm.
restaurant for 17 years. No experience on those sides of things. The land of acronyms and big business. I didn't know any of that corporate speak at all.
Sure.
Um, what I did know is I did know how to speak to customers.
Mhm.
And over 25 years of being in the restaurant industry, you if you're not empathetic in that industry, you're in real trouble.
Yep.
And I think that that really helped me out and gave me a lot of credibility. I was talking to small business owners, and they, for a coach, if they ask you, so tell me about you, what do you know about business? And I said, well, I owned a restaurant for 17 years. I had over 25 employees, did 1.2 a year. Uh, what do you want to know? I
Yeah.
made every mistake, that a restaurateur can make. I've made it. I've fallen on my face numerous times and I've banged my head against the wall. And in between all of those, I've had some really amazing successes.
Mhm.
Right. That gives me a lot of credibility and access to market.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that happened is I worked with an organization, a nonprofit organization called the Canadian Federation of Independent Business up here in Canada. You guys in the States call it the NFIB. It's a large lobby group that works on behalf of small to medium sized enterprise, lobbying governments so that small business have less red tape, less taxes, more support in hiring staff and all that kind of thing. So extremely excellent organizations. And if you want to cut your teeth in sales, there isn't a better place.
Mhm.
It's an intangible sale. You walk in the door into a small business and you say, "Hey, I'm from CFIB," and they're CFI who, and
Yeah.
it's very challenging, right? And you have to do it a lot.
Mhm.
Um, their expectations is that you hit 25 new businesses a day on top of doing renewals. So I did a lot of sales. Um, and I moved on. I kept on building my coaching practice little by little, working with some small businesses. And then I was introduced to masterminding
Okay.
and I loved it. So I developed my own group and I facilitated a masterminding group, which was a great way to market myself and to get some excellent coaching business.
Mhm.
And I was quite successful with that, so much so that I was identified by an organization up here in Canada called TEC,
Mhm.
which is a 50, 60-year-old organization that gets executives together one time a month in a peer-to-peer brainstorming way and educational way.
Mhm.
And in the US, it used to be called Tech and it's now called Vistage.
Oh,
So
sure.
I was approached by Tech to be a chair
Mhm.
because of the work that I was already doing with small business. And Tech didn't have a lot of inroads into small business. They were mainly medium sized to large size enterprise. Um, so that was great. I went in and I did it. I was quite successful. I built a group quite quickly.
Mhm.
Um, we did a lot of excellent work. Tech wanted me to continue and have other groups, and it was just too much. I couldn't give them what they wanted,
Yeah.
and so I went back to my own private practice
Mhm.
and continued and just grew from there. And
You prefer the
so,
private practice?
pardon me.
You prefer the private, the independent consulting,
Yeah,
independent coaching
yeah,
practice?
I was tech is supposed to be something that you do as part of your practice.
Mhm.
I think if you're going to be a professional in tech or Vistage, it's a full-time job.
Mhm.
It is full-time. You're always prospecting, building groups, maintaining groups, herding cats, and keeping those bums in the seats
Mhm.
is a full-time job. And if you have two or three groups, you're going to probably work 50 to 50, 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
Um, the challenge I had with that is that I'm more interested in the coaching side than the facilitating side. So I love facilitation. I love working with groups and leading groups. Um, I find that coaching, if you're working more than 15 hours a week in front of clients,
Mhm.
you're probably starting to reduce your capacity and the level of coaching that you're providing.
Okay.
It's very, it's
How
very
so?
deep. It's just very deep work.
Yeah.
And um, I know that perhaps there's lots of coaches out there that do contracts and they'll do a 3 month engagement or a 6 month engagement, $1,200 a month. We meet once a week for 1 hour. This isn't personal training for me. I can't do that. For
Mhm.
me, when I coach, I don't nickel and dime my client in terms of hours. I base my fees on expected outcomes.
Sure.
And the reason I do that is my experience has shown me that a business owner may have to talk to you 5 times in 1 week and
Mhm.
not again for another three.
Sure.
So the ebb and flow is just doesn't make sense to say, okay, well, that's, we already did our hour. I can't answer your call, or,
Sure.
thanks for the email. I'm looking forward to seeing you next Thursday at 2 o'clock to review this.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the person's desperate to make a decision on whether or not to fire an employee, right?
Sure.
And and I'm not a consultant. I'm not, but yet again, I am a trusted advisor, and so I have to have that flexibility. I think if you have more than 15 hours a week in front of a client, in a group of clients, I don't think you'll have that flexibility.
Mhm.
And I don't know what it's like for other coaches. It requires a lot of energy to coach. You really
Yeah.
truly have to let go of self and to leave enough room to to empathize to the level that you need to with a client.
And you need time for that personal emotional recovery, right? Because it is such deep work.
Yeah, and like any other, just like any other profession, I don't consider myself a business owner anymore. I have a practice. I don't
Yeah.
consider it a business. If I don't work, I don't make money.
Sure.
So for me, it's just that's not a business. That's a practice.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, one of the things I have in similarity with a business owner is that we're on 24/7.
Uh-huh.
If you get an amazing idea at 2 o'clock in the morning, you have a notepad beside your bed. You write it down,
Sure.
right? Because you're not going to remember when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
So and if if that idea pertains to one of your clients, you get an insight, or you click with something your client said a week ago.
Uh-huh.
You need to be able to take action right away. And I think if you have, if you're working 40, 50 hours a week in front of people, I just don't see where you'd have that capacity.
Mhm.
And maybe there are people out there that can do it. I can't.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. So tell us about some wins that you've had. What are some big wins that you've had in your practice?
um One of the things that I've been really successful with is working with partnerships.
Okay.
And in the years that I've worked with quite a few businesses where there's multiple owners,
Mhm.
and I presided over divorces, and I presided over marriages, and I presided over exits.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that this is an area where I've had some amazing wins for my
Mhm.
clients, where the return on investment for them having me involved has been in excess of 1,000%.
Okay.
So 10 times their investment. And the fulfillment that I get from watching people move their lives forward because they
Sure.
were able to join a business or exit a business is amazing.
Can you give us a specific story? Change the names to protect the innocent?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a story. I was brought in. And quite often, if it's a divorce situation, I'm brought in on other pretext, usually sales. Um, I was brought into a business that hadn't even opened its doors, and I had a pretty good inkling why I was being brought in, and yet until the client is ready to actually articulate it, I hold back and I keep my assumption to myself as I do discovery. Um, we started working, and I was working with both partners towards getting the doors open, and we did some excellent work in that process. And one of the partners was kind of hit and miss, really high energy, really low energy, kind of all over the map. Um, Ended up that there was a substance abuse challenge, which had to be attended to.
Yeah.
And that required taking one of the partners out of the equation.
Yeah.
And I was put in a situation which I don't wish on any coach, of actually having to do an intervention.
Okay.
And that intervention led to the end of that partnership,
Mhm.
which in the end would have sunk that business.
Mhm.
And there would have been probably $750,000 lost.
Mhm.
And that business today is, going into its third year, is doing really well. Um, the person with the substance abuse has turned their life around and has headed in other directions and is doing extremely well. Um,
So then
and
you should wish that on other coaches. That's great, man. That's a great outcome. I feel like coaches who
I
are put into situations like that are morally and ethically bound to do the right thing by everybody, right? And even if it's uncomfortable.
I think I was pushed past the limits of what ethically I should be doing.
Okay.
I'm not a counselor.
Sure.
I'm
Sure.
not a certified counselor, and it's not my job to do an intervention.
Uh-huh.
Um, what if the outcome of that intervention, because of my lack of knowledge, had it been that the guy went on a rampage or committed suicide?
Yeah.
Um, that intervention also led to a divorce, um, which was a good thing. It was all good once the waters, calmed down.
Of course.
With so many things could have gone wrong. I got lucky. I wouldn't want to do it on a regular basis, and that's what I don't wish on any other coach. We're all put, in coaching. There's a common saying that it's therapeutic and it's not therapy,
Yep.
right?
I know
I'm not
that
a
well.
psychologist, and and I don't pretend to be, and I quite often have recommended clients
Mm.
to professionals with their anxiety or depression, because that's not my expertise. Um, so absolutely, because everything came out right, it's a beautiful story and it's great, and it could have gone wildly wrong,
Yeah.
and it would have impacted my my coaching
Mhm.
at a very high level.
Mhm.
Another great example was um, working with a client who had multiple locations for their business, and being one of their locations being sought after by a very large corporation,
Mhm.
and guiding them through the emotional roller coaster of doing that transaction.
Mhm.
Extremely challenging. So, to put it in perspective, as an owner of a business, you can't turn around and come to your employees and say, "Hey, it's really exciting. This guy wants to buy the store,"
Mhm.
because you get a lot of fear and
Mhm.
things can fall apart really quickly. Your competitors can find out. There's all sorts of things that can take things sideways, and most businesses actually don't complete a sale. And the number one reason for that is emotions. The number two is the owner doesn't know what they don't know.
Sure.
So I think in dealing with, from a coaching capacity, in that particular situation, again, when I look at return on investment, which is a great measure of success,
Mhm.
um, that engagement again was over 1,000% return on investment,
Mhm.
because they were successful in selling that one location. Um, I had another business I was brought into, again on the auspice of working on sales,
Mhm.
um, and I did work with them for a couple of years. I helped them I taught them, instead of sales, I taught more about facilitating and staff meetings and stuff like that. And I showed them how to do it. So in experiential sales, I have a very simple methodology.
Mhm.
It's not mine, it's stolen. See one, do one, teach one.
Okay.
And so I would go in and I would say, this is what facilitation looks like. These are the tools of the trade. These are some of the things to take into consideration: seating arrangement, blah, 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 blah. Make sure everybody's got water, not Coca-Cola, all these things, and the whys of it, right? And then I do one and they watch. And then I handhold somebody else through doing one. And
Mhm.
then they have to turn around and teach it to the next person. And that way they get proficiency, right?
Love that.
Yeah. So it's a very simple methodology that's common in experiential learning.
Yeah.
Um, that particular business had been together for 17 years as a partnership, um, and the partnership was totally dysfunctional.
Mhm.
And um, and the the overwhelm, the stress had risen to a level where they couldn't really even communicate. They couldn't see each other's worlds at all.
Mhm.
And I worked with both of them, and that's quite a fun juggling act, I find,
Mhm.
of being able to hold the privacy and confidentiality of each person, and yet use that information so that they can start seeing the world from the same way. And what I have found is often the case is that they actually say the same thing, they just say it from different perspectives,
Mhm.
right? And they think that they're not saying the same things. And so I was able to guide those guys during the pandemic, actually,
Mhm.
to to an agreement.
Right on.
And one of the partners got bought out, and they are both way happier individuals today.
Right on. Nice.
Again, over 1,000% return on investment.
Great work. So you're mentioning you ROI as kind of a measure for success, and you've also spoken about fulfillment and just general good outcomes. What other yardsticks do you use, either officially or unofficially, to measure your success in a given engagement?
That's a great question. So when I initially started, one of the yardsticks that I was taught was a coach should work to getting fired as quickly as possible.
Coach should do what?
Get fired as quickly as possible, because if
Gotcha.
you go in and you're really effective in shifting the individual and developing capacity so that they're independent in it and they don't need you anymore,
Yep.
you've done your job, right?
Yep.
And the quicker you can do that, the more successful you are.
Sure.
And that didn't work too well for business. um, who wants to fire a customer? So though I this last year I've actually fired quite a few, but for a totally different reason. um, So one of the yardsticks that I developed was, how quickly can I get rehired?
Mhm.
How quickly can we define a new engagement that is actually worthwhile sinking our teeth into?
Yeah.
And and that is huge. Some of the things that I look for from a client to know that the work that we're doing is important. Oh, I have a little Alvaro on my shoulder.
An evil one, a devil one, and an angel one.
Thank, or way to
Yeah.
go,
Or way to
right?
go.
And for me, that's happened quite a bit. And that for me means that the relationship has gotten to a level where they're emulating a way of being
Yep.
that they would like to achieve. And that for me is huge. It's not an ego thing saying, oh, I'm guiding I'm the puppeteer master, right? It's not that at all. It's that they're showing a proficiency of consciousness around a certain capacity,
Sure.
and they're thinking of our conversations as a support in order to get through it independently.
Mhm.
And that's definitely a yardstick.
Mhm.
And the third yardstick I would share is referrals. The
That's
quality of referrals that I get
a
dictate the
great
quality
one.
of coaching that I'm giving.
That's solid. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So if I'm not getting referrals, there's a really big problem. And if they're referring me to people that are, on the verge of bankruptcy, and, just really need a psychiatrist more than a coach, that's probably not a great indicator of my success. And yet, if I'm getting referred to another partnership that is in a similar situation, because the magic that happened in that particular engagement, that's a great yardstick
Mhm.
to to say you're being successful. If you're not getting referrals, that that is a outside of the sales training part of it, where I teach how to ask for referrals and how to encourage referrals.
Yeah.
If you're not getting unsolicited testimonials and referrals, then you should definitely check in.
Do
And
you track your like net promoter score or anything like that?
no,
No.
no. As a business owner, both in my restaurant and in my practice, um, I don't measure anywhere near as much as I should.
Yeah.
I know the value of it, and I certainly encourage my clients to do it, especially in sales. Um, and yet, I don't personally do it myself. I am the mechanic with the rusty car or the cobbler without the shoes on that one.
There it is. Yeah, I was just gonna say the the marketing agency that doesn't market themselves very well because they get all their everything coming in from referrals.
Well, that's it, right? Yeah, and
um,
Michael, from a coaching perspective, that would be for me what I would look at is, so Michael, how what is the goal? What's the impact that you're trying to have? And
mhm,
how is that impact being limited by not hiring, by not doing that?
yeah,
And that's where that would go, right?
yeah,
Because the work that you do is amazing.
yeah. Thank you. I
And
appreciate that.
in the background conversations that we've had, the way you hold your business in that you want to be a world player impacting the world to the by introducing phenomenal coaches to the world. So being that kind of horse whisperer, so to speak, I mean that is I wish more marketers would view the world like that. It's really
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you, Alvaro. That's a very sweet thing to say. I appreciate that. And I say that on behalf of the entire team because I know that we're all very passionate about what we're doing. One thing that I commonly say about that, and I don't want to hijack the conversation, but I'll just say this one thing that for a marketing agency like us, it is difficult to make direct change on the world because
Mm,
we're marketing. But we're definitely able to be a major player in second and third order effects of change for good in the world by working with people like yourself.
absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons you and I hit it off is that we're aligned in that.
Mhm.
I don't I don't aspire to be a CEO. I get offered jobs all the time,
Yeah.
and my canned response is, I make a horrible employee. I'm a really bad employee. Um, and the magic of our of the relationship would be lost. And yet I think that I look at my practice the way you look at your business. I want to work with artificial intelligence. I want to work with environmental, businesses. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't work with an oil patch. Absolutely would work with an oil patch because I'm not blind to the fact that we're going to use oil for a long, long time. So what can I do to make the culture there better, to make the CEOs better, to make the salespeople better, keeping in mind that we have to be able to live on this planet while we burn fossil fuels,
Sure.
right? Um, so I want to work with these kind of people for the same reason that you do the work that you do,
Mhm.
because I want to be a part of the impact. I
Yeah,
want to
you're
be
able
a
to
part of
affect
that.
change that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's super important stuff um, for frankly for everyone is to have I mean I was just gonna say we're not necessarily here to make money, and that's not true. I love money. I want more of it. It allows me to affect change in my personal life and in the actual world through charitable donations and everything else. I love money and I'm here to make lots of money, but I also need a purpose to
Yeah.
go along with
I,
that.
I've never met a broke philanthropist.
Yeah, for sure, for 100%, for sure.
And quite often the most beautiful thing is, when people have clawed their way to the top, people like Bill Gates,
Yeah.
um, their desire to give back
Hmm.
and their capacity to give back are great. And we could claw our way all the way to the coffin and be wonderful fathers or mothers and sons and whatever, and be very loved by all the people in our community. And yet the impact and what we're able to do with that is limited.
Mhm.
And so money is a huge player. It's a common denominator of communications around the world.
Yeah, there's an interesting kind of philosophical preposition. I forget who came up with it or where I read it, probably years and years ago, but it's the idea that, who did the greater good? Mother Teresa, who spent her entire life working, basically one-on-one with people and devoted her entire life to help and assistance and doing God's work, or Bill Gates, who built a software empire and with essentially the swipe of his pen is wiping out malaria, something like
Well,
that.
that's interesting, and I've often thought about that, and I've had some great discussions around that. And here's my belief: it's not a this or that; it's a this
Maybe it's an
and that.
and. Yeah, it's an and instead of an or.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and to speak to your point of everybody, I don't think everybody. I think a lot of people are fine being just a blue collar worker and living their lives, and maybe having one or two kids, and not making a mark. And the reason I believe that is that, as I said before, we are tribal in nature, and we are like ants and like bees.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody gets to be a queen bee, and not everybody wants to be a queen bee. And even if you want to be a queen bee, when you get there, you may not really enjoy it. So
A lot of work.
phenomenal leaders don't come in bunches. Maybe you get a Siskel and Ebert, or a Simon and Garfunkel,
Mm-hmm.
where you get this, the Beatles, where you get this kind of, in music, you get this thing, in Canada, I guess the Group of Seven, for visual art. That might be kind of group work, but at the end of the day, phenomenal CEOs like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett,
Mm-hmm.
you name them, all the ones that are big today, that we don't need a lot of those to move the world.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if we had too many, it probably wouldn't work. If you put all those people together and said, "We're going to make the super business," you guys are going to be the X-Men of business, and you put them all in a room, the room would probably explode.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't function. And so I think it's important to, one of the things that I do is I measure the urgency and desire for change
Mm-hmm.
as a way of deciding whether or not to take a client on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the desire for change is not big enough, then there's not enough work for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Yeah.
had that many times. Oh, we'd love
Yeah.
to, we'd love to increase business by about 25%. Well, you don't need me for that.
Yeah.
You can just do it organically, or you can cut your cost by 10% and have the same amount of profits.
Yeah.
Cutting by 10% just means stop having so many lattes, and, like, it's not hard to cut 10% from your bottom, from your expenses.
Yeah.
Shop,
I
shop,
feel like
shop your
that
insurance around. So
that it brings to mind the new coach who is trying to coach their spouse. You can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped.
exactly. And so for me, when people's goals and aspirations and their urgency and pain are not great enough, um, there probably isn't a coaching engagement available. And
Mhm.
that's just you know, and the faster you know that as a coach, the better coaching you're going to do, and the better business you're going to have, the better practice you're going to have.
Yeah, love it. I want to circle back real quick to the success story you shared with the substance abuse
Yes.
success, the first one. And I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming up on our time here. Excuse me. But I'm curious, having gone through that, as difficult as it was, as good as the eventual outcome was, did that did that did you update the way that you prospect or the way that you screen potential clients based on that situation, so that you can avoid that in the future? What did you learn? This my what I'm trying to get at is, what did you learn from that? What were your takeaways from being in a situation like that? What could other coaches learn from you having been in that situation?
I think on a personal level, the first thing that went through my mind at the end of that session is in Canada, we're not as we're not as as quick to go to court as you guys are in the US, but we still do it. I don't carry malpractice insurance,
Okay.
and that's an issue.
Yeah.
Um, I've had bipolar, I've had drug addicts, I've had alcoholics, I've had all sorts of different clients, and
A lot
my
of
medic.
alcoholism in the C-suite for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's rampant.
Yep.
Um, and a lot of undiagnosed alcoholism,
Mhm.
and not just in the C-suite. It goes right then. I had a client where I had to go to the client and say, "I'm sorry, I'm not in a position to work with that person because they need to get a handle on their alcoholism, and that's not me.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do. He's a wonderful person, and there's nothing I can do. They're a functioning alcoholic, but not a coachable alcoholic."
Yeah.
um, so I think
Evaluating coachability,
I
maybe is that.
yeah I here's really how it impacted me. I recognized after that the need to be even stronger about drawing my boundaries as to where coaching stopped and therapy begins.
Mhm.
And I think, for anybody who is coaching, that's a blurred line in the best of times.
Mhm.
So when I coached the bipolar person, my first question at every session was, when's the last time you saw your doctor, and are you staying up with your meds?
Mhm.
And if the answer was, I'm sorry, or yeah, no, the meds are driving me crazy, I stopped using them,
Mhm.
the coaching session was about getting back to the psychiatrist.
Mhm.
And that's all the coaching session was about. I would
Yeah.
not talk about business.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
yeah,
It's interesting. I haven't heard a lot of other coaches talk about this kind of thing. So this is kind of fascinating for me. I'm wondering if this is, you know,
I think it gets our ego. There's a
huh.
lot of coaches that are closet counselors.
Yeah. I'm going to say, I'm wondering if this is a dirty little secret that I just haven't heard a lot about, or if this is.
And I think, Michael, part of the challenge is that there's a lot of coaches that don't know what they don't know,
Mhm.
and they're taught a lot of tools that are psychologically based,
Mhm.
and yet we're not counselors,
Mhm. Sure.
right? Um, I think that my studies in neuroscience have totally upped my game in being able to understand the impact that chemical soup that chemistry lab that we have inside us consistently produces.
Mhm.
It's a game changer, and it allows me to identify much quicker when people are actually exhibiting signs of anxiety. I'm
Mhm.
talking about a level of anxiety outside of the normal, that like, holy shit, I'm late for that appointment,
Sure. Sure.
right? Or I'm gonna have to speak at at this event. Oh my gosh, and my hands start sweating right away. Not that anxiety.
Of
I'm
course.
talking about the anxiety that makes it difficult to drag one foot out of the bed.
Clinical anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in being able to see the telltale signs a little bit better, I'm much quicker to say, so let's talk about a counselor.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I stop working with the person. It's just
Mhm.
I work in conjunction. And one of the things I do tell my clients who are seeing a professional, let them know that you're working with a coach.
Mhm.
And with your permission, I'm happy to talk to them. I'm not asking them to give me any information, but if they wish to speak with me, that I'm available for that, as long as you're okay with it,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah.
So um, to date, I've never spoken to a counselor.
Yeah.
I just I just feel that it's important that I make myself available.
Mhm.
So yeah, it probably is a dirty little secret in our industry.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. A lot of a lot of our clients, a lot of people that I speak to on this podcast, a lot of people that I just speak to in general on LinkedIn, wherever, that are coaches. A lot of the methodologies revolve around, the idea of EQ, emotional work. It's psychological, for certain. So that's very interesting to me.
I think the fact that you're working with CEOs as an executive coach, you're
Yeah,
working in the executive suite, your chances of tripping into somebody on the spectrum are pretty high.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Normal people don't want that level of responsibility that a CEO has.
But they can't do it.
Yeah,
They
for
don't
sure.
have the wherewithal. People, when we talked about when you talk about neurobiology, the neuroscience component of being in a plastic state,
Mhm.
people who have the capacity to be frustrated for long periods of time
Mhm.
and enjoy it
Mhm.
are phenomenally successful people. Talking
Yeah,
like Elon Musk.
sure, sure.
My
His
my guess, without ever having spoken with him, is that he's a man who lives in frustration
Who just lives in constant discomfort.
and he thrives on it.
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
And most of us don't. Most of us cave. Most of us capitulate and say, no, there's another path I can take, right?
Yeah, most of
Uh,
us want to snuggle up on the couch and watch
Watch Netflix.
Netflix for a hot minute on a Thursday night. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't imagine Elon Musk ever
Thank
gets that.
thank God that we have people that are wired that way,
For sure. Yeah,
because those little game changers.
yeah, yeah.
Can you imagine being Einstein? What level of frustration for how long would someone like that have to be able to live in
Hmm.
constantly? It's amazing. And
Yeah.
I think it's, probably something that hasn't been truly talked about or identified in leadership is that this is one of the qualities, is that you have to be wired to actually thrive on frustration.
Hmm. Good stuff. Let me ask you one more question before we say goodbye. This neuroscience stuff, as I've told you, fascinates me. I've got a deep interest in consumer psychology and behavioral science myself. There's a thing in the marketing world, a pop phrase called neuromarketing, which is exactly just that. It's essentially behavioral psychology and how people are wired and how they behave based on input. With what you're doing, you mentioned at the very beginning of our chat that this could or will be a game changer for coaching as it becomes more of an entrenched idea, in the industry. What resources, books? Maybe you could talk a little bit about the MIT class that you're taking. What resources would you have for people, for other coaches, for anyone listening to this, really, who would be interested in learning more about this?
Yeah. Um, we're so fortunate to live in the age we live in. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that I can attend MIT from Vancouver, BC is phenomenal.
Yep.
And so definitely, this is the first cohort going through in the neuroscience for business with MIT. I think it's been quite well subscribed. So my guess is that the business decision would be to do it again. Unfortunately, the CIQ, Judith Glaser, passed away, and her work is not being continued. They attempted to continue it with a cohort of people, and yet there wasn't a visionary that kind of stepped up to the plate. I don't think that could keep that bus moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, a lot of the materials are available. If you're interested in a primer on neuroplasticity, the one that I started with, I'm not saying it's the one to start with, is Norman Deutsch, The Brain That Changes Itself. And
Mm-hmm.
he wrote a subsequent book as well, which off the top of my head is not coming to mind, which is excellent. And so Norman Deutsch is great. Um, the person that my son actually laughs, he says, "You got a man crush." Um, that I've been listening to on a daily basis right now is Dr. Huberman, Andrew Huberman, with Huberman Labs at Stanford University.
Mhm.
Absolutely phenomenal. Spain is doing some all over the world. There's a lot of labs doing some phenomenal work. And one of the beautiful things that's going on in neuroplasticity um, is the amount of credit they give each other for for discoveries, for different case studies that they've done, white papers that have been written. So you can get really, really high level education
Mhm.
for free
Mhm.
if you have the rigor and the desire and the passion to actually follow it. So Andrew
The self
Huberman is
self drive.
probably, yeah,
That's
Andrew Huberman for anybody, even somebody not interested in neuroplasticity, is probably quite entertaining to watch
Mhm.
because he
You know?
presents really well. He has some excellent podcast interviews like this that he's done, uh, and he has his own Huberman Lab um, YouTube, which I encourage anybody to watch, where he covers a lot of different subjects. How to focus, the importance of sleep, um, emotions from a neuroscience standpoint. And
Mhm.
he has a great way of taking extremely scientific knowledge and making it understandable to somebody as simple as myself. So it's a great way to start. Dr. Tara Schwartz, who's the professor at MIT, is excellent as well. Yeah, there's no lack of resources. I strongly encourage anybody who's doing coaching to start looking at it if they haven't already.
Awesome. Alvaro Peralta, the Wired coach with Wired Execs. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. It's great talking to you.
Michael, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
Cheers, buddy. Take care.
All right.